the public. And that's where my story starts. I was reaching a subscriber milestone on my YouTube channel and wanted to livestream something spooky themed, but everything I wanted to do needed a permit or some kind of convoluted process. Then a mate of mine suggested the old Swan View tunnel, but at night. It's open, it's free, and most of all, it's deserted at night. The only problem was that the 4G reception in some of these areas can get a bit patchy, so I wanted to check it out beforehand. So on a Friday night, my mate and I decided to check it out. When we got there, it was exactly as my mate explained. I checked the reception and it was pretty decent, but we needed to check inside the tunnel, so that's where we headed. I looked over at my mate, who seemed to be unfazed by any potential dangers as we headed over to the tunnel. He's done this before, and he felt pretty safe about everything. Plus the neighbourhood this park was in was considered an upper mid-class area. The best way to walk through this tunnel was to walk around outside of it to the far side, and then walk through it, which would take you back to the parking lot. So we entered the tunnel, and inside was just pure darkness. We couldn't see anything at the other end. The ground was all gravel and stone, so the ground crunched with every step we made, and that echoed all throughout the tunnel. While all this was happening, I kept checking my phone to check the reception, and that's when I noticed something. My mate and I were in lockstep with each other, and that echoed. The problem was, I started hearing what was a third set of footsteps. I looked back a couple of times, but I couldn't see anything. There were no figures, and eventually the moonlight started running out. We kept going forwards. My mate looked back a couple of times too, but he didn't seem too fazed. The footsteps really didn't sit right with me, and I kept looking back each time. Eventually, I felt that uneasy that I turned on the torch on my phone and shined it behind us. There was nobody there, but when we turned around to walk back forwards, that's where we found the source of those footsteps. There was someone walking towards us on the other end. Now this is a public park, which means other people may also be here too. The reason why I never went back to this place after that night was because the guy started running away back out the tunnel once we saw him. Growing up in the early 2000s in Australia, it was pretty standard for people to be out and about rather than indoors after school and on weekends. iPads didn't exist yet. Dial-up was still pretty much the only internet you could get, and anyone using a computer was considered a nerd. I was a nerd because I used the computer a lot, but I also spent a lot of time catching up with my mates, and we often cycled together to each other's houses. So on this particular Friday night, me and two other mates were heading over to another guy's house about a couple of suburbs over. I had to stop in at the deli because my hay fever started playing up and I needed some antihistamines to get me through the next day, so I detoured off, but it wasn't far from my mate's place. I swallowed a tablet before getting on the bike and heading towards his place. Part of the trip there goes through a long park with stuff all in except turf everywhere and an empty creek running across the middle, which was also covered in turf. There was also a concrete footbridge connecting the footpaths either side of that creek. So when I went there were some shady people standing on it wearing dark hoodies, and this suburb was a bit more on the dodgy side, so I sped up and rode through the creek. Thinking back on it now, it was dark. I couldn't see the ground below, so it was lucky that I didn't hit a rock or something and toppled over and, equally as embarrassing, fall on my ass in front of these guys. I made it over, got back on the footpath, and carried on riding through the park to my mate's place. Now on the exit out of the park, there's these yellow rails with a little red stripe through them, and they're designed to stop bicycles and motorbikes from going through the park. So being accustomed to this, I came to a stop, got off my bike, and saw that one of those fucking guys were right behind me. I quickly got through the rails and got back on my bike, riding the fuck out of there. It took him a few steps to come to a complete stop, which told me he was running fast. I used to catch the train to and from work each day. One evening, when I was on my way back from work in the city, I noticed a seemingly sweet couple in their late 60s with a young kid about 3 or 4 years old. He was throwing tantrums and asking for his mum repeatedly, basically driving everyone nuts in the train cabin. They were trying to be good grandparents and trying to calm him down, give him snacks, etc., and they were very patient with him overall. Luckily, my stop was coming up, so I didn't have to endure any more of that damn screaming. Well, I found out the next night that the kid was begging for his mum because he had been kidnapped, and these people weren't even related to him. Thankfully for their stupidity, they were greeted at the next stop after where I got off, and the kid was returned safely to his parents. They had gone into a primary school and pretended to be the grandparents of one of the kids. So when the mother came to pick him up, she absolutely freaked out when the teacher told her that his grandparents, who were actually dead in real life, came to pick him up. You don't really think this could ever happen around you, but opportunistic criminals exist everywhere.